I did bring some copies of my foraging book, and I know a few people are interested in them. So they cost $15, and all the money goes to the land trust that published the book because they allow foraging on all their properties that are open to the public, and I'm so grateful for that. I just said keep all the money the book makes, just buy more land with it. All right, so you can get one now or later, whenever you want.
Yes, so welcome to Diggers. For those that have not been here, so welcome for Russ Cohen's Part 1, our presentation of the wild edibles. And I see some folks anxious to pay for our event, so it's past the hat event. So we can pass, so we can leave this on a good spot for folks to pay right in here. So thank you for coming out tonight, and let us know if you have any questions. There's a bathroom right behind you. This sink is great for water, and we're very excited to welcome back Russ Cohen this evening, and we'll have him tomorrow. So let us know if you have any questions. And Russ, sounds like you're ready to go.
I am. All right, so, and before I forget, I did bring something for you to nibble and sip on, and the thing I have for you to sip on is an exceedingly small amount, but I have enough for everybody to nibble on the thing I brought for you to eat. So we'll do that at the end, all right? Okay, so hi everybody. I'm from outside of Boston, Arlington, Mass. I grew up in Weston, Mass, and I'm spending a lot of time right near where I grew up because I've set up a native edible plant nursery. This is what I'm doing in my retirement. I decided to play the role of Johnny Appleseed for native edible species. So I'm propagating hundreds of plants from seed, and then working on arrangements with land trusts and cities and towns and state and federal agencies and schools and colleges just to plant this stuff in appropriate places in the landscape. And I've done a couple of projects in New Hampshire and in other New England states, and I'm looking forward to doing more. I'm just gearing up on this, and so my plants are getting bigger, getting more and more appropriate to, they're big enough to actually, survive once they're planted. So anyway, but that's not the focus of this talk, although a lot of the stuff in the show are plants that I'm actively propagating and trying to get more of on the landscape. But in the meantime, everything in the show is stuff that you're going to just run into here in the White Mountains. Not all of it is really wildernessy. Some of the plants are weeds that you might find in your backyard or in your vegetable garden. But a lot of the plants are native species, but I should say in general that foraging enriches all the time I spend outdoors. So whether it's near Boston where we live, or here in the mountains, or along the seacoast, just earlier this week I did a program, a similar deal, a talk, and then the next day a walk at a place called Fisher's Island, which is actually in New York State, although it really ought to belong to Connecticut because it's just a few miles south of New London. So you actually have to go from Long Island to New London and then to Fisher's Island. You can't go from anywhere in New York directly to Fisher's Island with any kind of public transportation. So anyway, so it's great to talk about coastal wild edibles and seaweeds and stuff like that. So I'm not going to talk about seaweeds tonight. I hope you'll understand we're not really in the right habitat for seaweeds. But you've got a lot of wonderful things here in the mountains that they don't have down where I just was. So it's refreshing for me to be able to connect to the outdoors through my taste buds wherever I am. And so that's one of the messages of this talk, is that there's edible wild plants all over the place. So if you like being outdoors, knowing what you can nibble on just makes it that much more fun. And even if you're not actively hunting and gathering, just to see this stuff, it's like having old friends greet you as you walk along the trails. So that's why I do it. You guys seeing the screen okay? It's dark enough in here for you? All right, I see nods. All right, so that's good. Oh, that's even better. All right. So anyway, so the show is organized chronologically by foraging opportunities. So I'm going to start in the spring, talk about stuff that's available in the spring, and then we'll gradually work our way out through this time of year and then past this time of year into the fall. All right? So let's see what image number 1 is. Can I get this to go? There we go. All right. So what is this plant? Okay. Oh, I think I heard somebody say ostrich fern, which is the correct answer. Yes, this is the ostrich fern. This is kind of important. Maybe you guys are really savvy up here in the White Mountains, but for where I'm from in the Boston area, picking the wrong kind of fern is one of the biggest mistakes that novice foragers make, because they'll be hiking the trails in the spring and they'll see a whole bunch of ferns at that immature fiddlehead curled up stage, and they'll say, oh, fiddleheads, boy, that looks an awful lot like what I've seen for sale in the stores. It must be the same thing. And so they pick it and they bring it home and they cook it up and it tastes horrible, and they say, oh, where did they go wrong? Where they went wrong is they harvested the wrong species of fern. I only know of 2 species that taste good and only one that's safe to eat in quantity, and that's this one, the ostrich fern. So I'm going to teach you the 5 ways to distinguish the ostrich fern from any other kind of fern. So first thing you want to look at is this going to work if I push that button? No, let's try this button. There we go, habitat. Ostrich ferns tend to like alluvial floodplain soil. So that would be like along the Connecticut River or the Androscoggin River, some of the tributaries. That's where you're most likely to run into the right conditions for the ostrich fern. So it's very unlikely you're going to run into ostrich fern in a really rocky area, like the top of a mountain, something like that. That's not its natural habitat. Then to go back a slide, see if I can do that. All right, so what you want to look at as characteristics of the fern when it's at the harvestable stage is you notice that it's the little curled up parts are growing in a vase-shaped clump. So look for that. And then also, let's see if I get this latest work. All right, great. So then these things are the scales that often wrap over this part, which is called the crozier. This stuff flakes off really easily with your fingers, so it's not like a wool like on a cinnamon fern. And then if you look carefully, you can see a little indentation, like if you cut it in cross-section, it would look like a U, just like a celery stalk. So all the ostrich ferns have that gouge running down the little stem. And then, so I've told you 4 things so far, and then the 5th thing are the fertile fronds, the spore-bearing fronds, and that's these guys right here. So they're out too when the fiddlehead stage is out. And they also have that gouge running down their little stems. So if you're seeing all 5 of those characteristics, you know for sure that's the ostrich fern. Now, perhaps all of you have had the wonderful opportunity to eat ostrich ferns that you picked yourself, but for a lot of the people I talk about, they haven't. They've only bought ostrich ferns at the store, and perhaps like me, they weren't particularly impressed with how good they tasted, store-bought ostrich ferns. And the main reason for that is probably they've been sitting around for weeks, losing whatever interesting flavor they had. So the secret to eating a delicious ostrich fern is to minimize the time between when you pick it and when you eat it. So I learned that from this woman here, Beth Bassler, fellow naturalist from Western Massachusetts, who took us to a fiddlehead patch, and she brought her camp stove to the fiddlehead patch with her, and we were eating the fiddleheads 10 minutes after we picked them, and they were amazingly good that way. So I encourage you to do that. Now let me talk about one other issue, which is conservation, which is important when native species are involved, because native species often have important roles in the ecosystem. Animals rely upon them for food and some other important portion of the life cycle. So I encourage people to use some forbearance and restraint when interacting with native species and gathering them from the wild. So this ostrich fern right here, you know, that's the typical number of the curled up fiddleheads you'll see in a clump. You know, like half a dozen or so. That's a pretty typical size. So if you pick just 1 or maybe 2 of the curled up parts per clump, that's a sustainable level of harvest. That the fern can definitely take that level of harvesting. Unfortunately, though, people, and I suspect that this is mostly the people that are selling the ostrich ferns, will hammer this plant in the wild, and they'll pick every sellable ostrich fern they could possibly find. And if you know, the plant might hold a couple in reserve at the base of the plant that may come up a week or 2 later, and if somebody else went in and hammered those plants too and picked every single curled up frond from that patch, that's sapping a lot of strength from rhizome. You can actually kill the fern by harvesting that hard. So 1 or 2 of the curled up parts per clump, that's what my recommended level of picking is on this, just to make sure that it's not unduly depleted from the wild. All right, so let's go on to the next one. Okay, so this plant, anybody know what this plant is?
Marsh marigold?
Marsh marigold, very good, yes. This is the marsh marigold. Sometimes people may have heard of it as a cowslip. And this relates to New Hampshire because I can vouch for certain that back in the days before everybody had refrigeration, like before the Second World War, but there's a seat right here, there's some cushions right up here in the front if you'd like to make yourself comfortable. And did everybody get this handout that I had on eating birch trees? Okay, so remind me at the end. I'll pass those out at the end if you didn't get one. So anyway, all right. So this is a native wildflower. But before the Second World War, when people didn't have refrigeration, and they weren't shipping in vegetables from California, whatever, so you were having green vegetables in the wintertime. People were living off their root cellars, they're living off the food that they had put up, and so they're really yearning for leafy green vegetables in the spring, and this is one of the native species they would seek out, along with the ostrich fern fiddleheads. So the marsh marigold leaves, you can eat them, you do have to boil them, and they're going to be best if you harvest them before the flowers come out. But this is a beautiful spring wildflower, and so you wouldn't want to pick so much of it from a plant that you could hurt that plant. So I'm picking 1 or 2 leaves per plant. But I have seen places in New England where there are huge patches of the marsh marigolds, like under some alder thickets where you have the brook running through, where there are hundreds if not thousands of plants. And even if you're just picking 1 or 2 leaves per plant, you'll get enough to have a decent meal from it. Now, you know how all these wild meats are supposed to taste like chicken, like rattlesnake meat tastes like chicken, frog legs taste like chicken. A lot of wild leaves are supposed to taste like spinach, and the marsh marigold really does taste like spinach. And you might say to yourself, well, I'll go to the store and buy spinach, and that's fine if you want to do that. I'm just sharing with you a plant that's a wild plant grows here in New Hampshire. It was used historically by people when they couldn't go to the store and buy spinach. And so you can gather it and eat it yourself. You do have to boil it first, remember that. Or you can just enjoy how beautiful it is, whatever you want to do. This is a plant I'm actively propagating by seed and planting in the wild, just as I think there should be a lot more of it. All right. So, okay, what's this plant? Oh, you guys are ringers. Yes, this is the stinging nettle. And this is typically the first thing I'm gathering every spring. In Boston, it's in season around the second week of April, so I would add a week or 2 to that for around here. And where you're likely to find nettles are places where there are or were livestock, because it's a plant that likes a very rich soil, kind of like what you'd find near the manure pile or near the compost pile, something like that. So I'll harvest it when it's this small. This is the ideal time to get it. And what I'll do is just snip off the top cluster of each plant, like the top inch or so of it, top cluster leaves. And I'll just do that from plant to plant to plant. And usually you're finding nettles in big enough patch that even if you're just taking that little amount, you're getting enough. And this year I finally measured it, and I discovered that 300 of the nettle tops cooked down will produce 1 pint of the cooked nettle greens. And that sounds like a lot of shrinking, and it is some shrinking, but 1 pint of nettle greens is a lot of nettle greens, enough to use in various recipes and stuff like that I'll get into in just a second. So, all right, so I'm going to teach you how to prepare this plant. So I know how to harvest it with bare fingers without getting stung, but if you're a novice, you might want to wear gloves to avoid getting stung. And throw the nettles in a bag, bring them home, dump them into some kind of container like a bucket or a bowl of water, and swirl them around just to wash them. And then take some tongs, you're still not touching them with your hands, and fling them into the cooking pot. You're just steaming them in basically the water that's still clinging to them from the washing process. And so after you do that, the nettle greens will shrink quite a bit, but then what you have left at this stage, after about 5 or 6 minutes worth of steaming, they're ready to go. And you can eat them just plain if you want. And a lot of books say this tastes like spinach, but I think the flavor is much more like split peas. But you can use steamed nettle greens any way you can use spinach. Like, for example, spanakopita, the Greek spinach pie with the phyllo dough and the feta cheese, the steamed nettle greens work really well on that. And also in my book, I've got a recipe for cream of stinging nettle soup, which sounds like something they might have made in the old Addams Family TV show. But it's very easy to make. It's just a pureed soup. And then, let's see, yeah, these stinging nettle balls. So this is the very retro spinach ball recipe where you're using Pepperidge Farm stuffing mix to hold it together. And you might say, well, that's cheating to do that. And I say to you, especially when I'm giving a talk to foodies that are real purists about it, I say, fine, grow your own wheat. Grind your own grain, you know, make your own bread from flour, and then make your, you know, stuffing mix, whatever. Do whatever stage in the process you want to start that, fine. Or you go to the store and buy Pepperidge Farm stuffing mix and mix the steamed nettle greens in it, and it comes out great. Whatever you want to do, it's fine. I'm not proud. If there's a shortcut and make something really yummy, I'm happy to take it. So anyway, so that's the steamed nettle balls. That's very good. All right, what's this plant? All right, I'll just tell you, this is catnip. And catnip, it looks a little bit like nettle. That's why I put it next to the nettles in the progression here. But one way that many of you in the audience probably knew this was a mint, you knew at least that much, was because the plant has square stems. If you cut the stem in cross-section, it would be 4 equal size, and the leaves come opposite from each other. The combination of the square stems, opposite leaves, and the aromatic quality of the plant, that's a mint, and there are no poisonous species of mint that grow around here. So what you use the mint for just depends on the flavor, and most mints fall into a sweet or savory category, and catnip is kind of an exception. It's sort of in between, but you know, there's the spearmints and peppermints that you use for mint ice cream, mint juleps, mint candy, mint tea, stuff like that. And then there's the savory mints, the more like thyme and sage that you use for pizza topping, sauces making, soups, casseroles, stuff like that. So depending upon which mint, whether it's wild or cultivated, you know, where it fits in that category, that affects how you use it. So this one is used to make a tea, mostly, and a medicinal tea, and it has the opposite effect on people that it has on cats. It's a sedative, it's a tranquilizer. So people will drink catnip tea to relax after a stressful day, and you can use the leaves fresh or dried, either way. All right, so one thing I forgot to tell you guys, a journalist might say, you buried the lead. You talked about a plant called stinging nettle. You didn't talk about the sting. All right, so let me get back to that, because this is the antidote to the stinging nettle, so that's why it reminded me. Okay, all right, so if you've never been stung by a stinging nettle, it's not like poison ivy where you find out a day or two later that you got into it. You get stung by stinging nettle, you know right away. But on the good side, the sting rarely lasts more than an hour or two, and there are various antidotes available, like this plant called the curly dock, that will shorten the time even more. So you just grab this plant, scrunch it up, get the juice out, and put it on the place where you're stung by the stinging nettle. It helps make the sting go away. But this plant's edible too in the spring and in the end of the summer. It has young leaves like this that you can. This is a cousin of the French sorrel, so it has kind of a similar way that you can use it. You can make a soup out of this, a sauce out of this. I find this plant has a little bitter tinge to it, so I will blanch it, drop it into boiling water for just 20 seconds, and that will take the bitterness away, and then you can use it as a French sorrel, or also as a spinach substitute. So this is also a really great substitute for the spinach and the spanakopita, the blanched cold-up leaves. And, all right, so this plant has another medicinal value I'll just mention in case any of you are interested in that. So it has a big yellow taproot, which is not edible, it's just used medicinally. So some herbalists refer to this plant as yellow dog for that reason. And if you yank up the plant, you get the big taproot, you snap it in half, you'll see how yellow it is inside. So the root has several medicinal values, but the one I'm most familiar with is that it helps the body assimilate iron better. So pregnant women, anemic people will take it for that purpose to boost their iron levels. Okay, this is very common farm and garden weed. So if you're finding stinging nettle, you're probably going to find this one not far away. Okay, so this plant is at or near the top of the ecological blacklist. The ecologists really hate it. It's a very ubiquitous, pervasive plant, but it is really yummy, and it's called Japanese knotweed. And this is a plant that some people call Japanese bamboo or Mexican bamboo. It's actually, although the dried stalks in the fall through the winter, the following spring look a lot like bamboo stalks, it's actually not even distant related to bamboo. It's in a completely different branch of the plant world. It's actually related to rhubarb, and it tastes like rhubarb, which I'll explain in just a second. So the best time to harvest it in our area, it's mid-April to early May. Here, it's 2 to 3 weeks later. So to be honest with you, sometimes when I'm preoccupied and haven't gotten all the nettle I need, all the Japanese knotweed I need in Boston, I drive north into New Hampshire and catch up to where the growing season is and is far along, and I can catch it at an earlier stage in its development, which was when you want to harvest it. So just imagine all those dried stalks, before I get to that, so this plant thrives in disturbance. So you see it a lot along rivers that are naturally scoured by ice. That creates a disturbance this plant can take advantage of. You see it along roadsides where sometimes the snow plows will get below the surface of the snow and pick up some of the rhizome of the Japanese knotweed, and it's carried along on the plow for a few miles and then falls off and starts a new colony. Or it can grow in very, urbanized, impacted areas. But that's not the best place to pick it. So you wouldn't want to gather knotweed that's growing next to the dumpster by the auto body shop. You want to find it along a river or along a nice rural road. And as long as the plant looks healthy, because another problem with this one, because it's an invasive species, occasionally it's sprayed with herbicide. And so, but it will be obvious, the plant will not look good if it's sprayed with herbicide. It's going to be all stunted, wilted, spotted, won't look very palatable. So you want to pick from a nice healthy patch that is suffering benign neglect. That's good, and an out-of-the-way location. All right, so what you're going to see at the harvesting time is a bunch of the dried stalks from last year's growth, and then a whole bunch of shoots like this coming up in the midst of it. And they'll look like asparagus with these little red dots on it. And you just snap that off at ground level and take that stalk and just steam it for a few minutes and eat it hot or cold like asparagus. But my favorite stage to eat this plant is what I call the wild rhubarb stage, where the stalks get a little taller, about 1.5 or 2 feet tall. So just cut them at ground level, and so there's an example of the stalk that I'm harvesting. And I'm looking for the fattest sprouts I can, because I like to peel the skin off of them, because the skin is stringy. And although there's nothing poisonous about it, if you bake with the knotweed without taking the skin off, it might get caught in your teeth. So I trim that off. But as you can see, the knotweed stalks are hollow, so you don't want to trim too deeply. All you have left is the hole. You just want to get that very outer layer off. And then you have this crisp green tube right here, which is tart and juicy. You can eat it right on the spot. It's just very similar to Granny Smith apple. Or you can chop it up like I have here, and then use it instead of rhubarb in any recipe calling for rhubarb. So, for example, here is my strawberry knotweed pie that I make just about every year, and virtually everybody I feed this to prefer it over strawberry rhubarb pie. Right? So it's really yummy, very easy to make if you make pies, okay? But I realize that some of you might look at this pie and say, I'm intimidated by pies, and that's a latticework top. I don't know if I can pull that off. So I'm going to show you a way to use the knotweed that requires absolutely no cooking skill whatsoever. Is you can just take those little hollowed out knotweed pieces and fill them with like a salmon mousse or a flavored cream cheese. You have a little tart edible container, just pop it right in your mouth, and you don't need to have to know how to cook to do that. So that's a great way to use it. All right, so here's another plant that the ecologists really hate called garlic mustard. And I don't get quite as excited about eating this one as I do about the knotweed, but you can eat it. And what I consider to be the tastiest part of the plant is the second year's growth. So before it blooms, even before it really produces flower buds on top, it's the stems, where they're about 9 inches tall and nice and soft and supple. Those are edible raw. You can chop them up and put them in a stir fry. So if you're going to eat garlic mustard, that's the part I'd recommend. And to help identify this plant, you push this button to do that. Is that going to give you a rest? Okay. So you see there are white flower petals, 4 petals in the shape of a cross. That's where the expression cruciferous vegetables comes from. So this is a member of the mustard family. There are no poisonous members of the mustard family that grow around here, so all you have to know is that. And if you see a plant like that, scrunch up a leaf and sniff it, and you should get a very garlicky smell. That's what you have. It's garlic mustard. There's no other plant that has those flowers, those leaves. But as I say, you want to harvest the plant before the flowers come out, ideally. So just look for the violet, the heart-shaped leaves with the large rounded teeth. Scrunch it up, sniff for garlic, you get garlic, you got garlic mustard. Okay, so All right, so here is a relative called wintercress, and I mainly see this at farms. Like farms, usually this weed comes out in early to mid-May before they have, put in the corn or whatever. And this will eventually have a yellow flower, but you want to harvest it before it blooms. And my favorite part of these guys right here, which are basically broccoli florets. And so you boil it for a few minutes, and then it tastes identical to broccoli raw. It's very good. And this plant can be very abundant. Anybody know what this plant is?
Phlox.
Okay, that's a frequent mistake. It is not phlox, and the easy way to tell it apart from phlox is all phlox family flowers have 5 petals. These have just 4 petals. This is actually a plant called Dame's Rocket, and it's another member of the mustard family, and this is considered to be an invasive species, so that means a guilt-free foraging opportunity, which is true with the garlic mustard and the Japanese knotweed. You cannot pick too much of an invasive species, provided that you're not spreading them around in the process, but that is easily avoidable. So, so pick all you want. And you see how this plant comes in a white and a purpley color? That's invariably how you see it in the wild, the 2 colors together. And so, although there's other parts of this plant you can eat, I find the flowers to be very yummy. There's sort of a sweet garlicky, radishy flavor. And so they're fun to eat right off the plant, or you can use them in salads or to decorate other things. I mean, we had a wonderful flower-laden salad tonight as part of our supper here at the Acres. And during the spring, if this plant had been available, it would have gone in very well in that salad. So anyway, although the white flowers and the purpley flowers have the same flavor, I tend to just use the purple flowers because purple's a funner color than white, but you can absolutely use the white flowers too. All right, so anybody know where I took this photo? Really? I thought somebody here might. I'm sure a lot of you have been to this exact spot where I took this photo. Okay, so you're on Route 16 in North Conway, and you've just run the gauntlet of all the outlet stores, and you finally break out in the open, and it's this little turnoff as you're heading north towards Storyline and stuff like that, and you look off to the left across this field, and there's the presidential range in Mount Washington in the distance. So that's where this photo was taken. But the point of the photo is to talk to you about dandelions. Dandelions are probably responsible for turning more people off of eating wild plants than anything else, and the story usually goes something like this. It's the spring, you look out in your backyard, you see all the yellow flowers and all the dandelions blooming, and you say to yourself, I heard dandelions are edible, I should try them. And so you go out to your yard, you pick a few leaves, you bring them indoors, you put a little oil and vinegar on them, you take a bite, it's incredibly bitter, you spit it out and you say, yuck, I'm never going to eat a wild plant again, which is a real shame because dandelions are great if you eat the right part at the right time. So what is that? And when is that? Well, in my opinion, when you start seeing whole fields turning yellow from dandelion flowers, it's really too late to be eating dandelions. So I like to eat them before the flowers open. In fact, my favorite part are the unopened flower buds, like these guys right here. And dandelion flower buds are among my favorite vegetables, period. Cultivated or wild. The flavor's like a cross between corn, Brussels sprouts, artichokes, and what's the third? Corn. All right. So did I cover 4 different things? Anyway, spinach, corn, Brussels sprouts, and artichokes. All those 4 things together, just one vegetable. So now, admittedly, each one of these things is relatively small. It's like a 1/4 inch in diameter. You might hold it up and say, "Great, Russ says it's yummy, but how am I going to feed my family with this teeny little dandelion bud?" And I want to assure you that if you go to the edge of a farm field, especially an organic farm field, where they're not nuking things with herbicides, you're going to find dandelions there. And the dandelions often get rather large in a place like that. And I have found individual dandelion buds with over 200 buds per plant. Yes, it takes a little while to pick the buds off, but if you're finding plants like that, you can get all you need to feed yourself, your family, your dinner guests, whatever. So to prepare those dandelion buds for eating, all I do is just pick them and put them in some kind of container of water and just stir them around to get the dirt off of them. Then get a pot of water boiling in the stove, drop the dandelion buds in there, and cook them for 60 seconds. That's it. And then they are done, and then you can incorporate them into soups or omelets or casseroles or falafel or lots of different ways. But before you do anything with them, before you even put any salt or butter on them, try them just plain. I think you'll be amazed at how good they are. And if you want to eat dandelion leaves, this is the right time to get them. So when I'm picking the flower buds off the plant, if I see some tender young leaves in there too, I'll just gather them and prepare them the same way. All right? Okay, so here's a plant that, is this blooming yet up here in New Hampshire? Okay, so it's definitely doing that in southern New England too. So there's a plant called chicory, and it definitely is very visible when it's blooming. Those flowers, by the way, are edible. They have almost no flavor. So why use them? Because blue is an unusual food color, so it's fun to just snip those petals and get them in a salad. So that might have been an interesting addition to our salad tonight, is have some chicory flowers added in. Alright, so anyway, so chicory leaves are edible in the spring or in the fall. In the summer, they're going to be way too bitter to eat, but in the spring or the fall, they're good. And then, as I explained, the flowers are edible. And then the roots of chicory are edible, but the main use for them is to make a drink from them. This is all explained in my book, but basically, you roast the roots, you grind them up, and you make a beverage from the roots. And you can use whatever device you use to make your coffee, your Mr. Coffee Maker, your plunger, whatever. You can use the same device for the chicory. I find that I only need about half the amount of chicory grounds to make the same strength beverage as coffee grounds. And so you make the beverage, and it does taste a lot like coffee, especially if you usually drink your coffee with cream and sugar, and you drink the chicory drink the same way. The flavor is really similar. The one big difference is that chicory does not have caffeine in it. So if you're one of these people who says, well, what's the point of drinking it if there's no caffeine in it, then the chicory's just not going to cut it for you.
Are there any medicinal benefits to chicory?
Oh, yeah. Well, chicory has inulin in it. And inulin is a complex carbohydrate that does not place a large insulin demand on the body. And so that's considered a beneficial thing for, people that might, have limited capacity to absorb a lot of, insulin-demanding foods. And you see inulin derived from chicory in a lot of other manufactured products. So I think a lot of chicory is grown just to extract the inulin, never mind just drinking it. But so all I can do is just vouch for my own personal experience with chicory and just tell you that if you've ever ordered chicory at a restaurant, whatever, and drunk it and not been very impressed, I find that the batch that I made myself, just from roots I gathered myself, is better than anything I've ever bought, even at at a food co-op or a place like that. So maybe because I'm more in control of the roasting process and I can time it right so the chicory's at its prime, whatever. Okay, so here's a plant called chickweed. This is a very common farm and garden weed. And although in a little shady spot it might still be fine now, in general by this time of year it's gotten very leggy, not very appetizing. But in the spring and in the fall, you can find it at this stage, and I use it as a sprout substitute in a sandwich or a lettuce substitute in a salad, and it's quite good. All right, here's the oxeye daisy, so you might still see a few of these flowers around. And the whole plant's edible, but the best part are the leaves before the flowers come out. So how do you know what the plant looks like? Well, I have a photo to show you, and I apologize, it's a little out of focus, but I'll just describe to you what to look for. So if you see the flower buds right here, so there's one right there, there's one right there, there's one right there. The flower buds have a flat top to it, and you'll see markings on there that look like the spokes of a bicycle wheel. That's what I look for. And then get a good look at those leaves attached to the plant with those flower buds. And I have found this oxeye daisy leaves to be so yummy raw, I've never cooked with it. I just put the leaves in a salad, and it's very good that way.
Are the flowers edible?
There's nothing poisonous on a daisy. The yummiest part are the leaves before the flowers come out. Okay, so this is sheep sorrel. So this plant shows up over most of New Hampshire because most of New Hampshire has a very low pH soil. And this plant is an indicator of a low pH soil. So if you've got this growing in your backyard, you do not have to test your pH. This plant is telling you what your pH is. So anyway, this really is a diminutive cousin of the French garden sorrel. This can be used exactly the same as French sorrel for the sorrel sauce, the sorrel soup, and stuff like that. Now here's a completely unrelated plant with the same flavor called wood sorrel, and this one is extremely common. I probably run into it in over 90% of the wild edibles walks I lead. We see this plant on the walk. And another nice thing about it is that it has a very long season of availability when it's yummy, anytime from about a month into the spring until weather gets really cold. You can find it at this stage. And any tender part of the plant is edible, so these yellow 5-petal flowers are edible, the leaves are edible. You see the leaves have the heart-shaped leaflets. And then these guys right here, these are the capsules, and they're tart and juicy, and you can eat them too. Now, the chemical responsible for the sour flavor in this plant and in the sheep sorrel I just showed you is a chemical called oxalic acid, which is not good to eat in huge amounts. Like if you ate a big salvo full of just this plant, it could inhibit your body's ability to uptake calcium, and it could irritate your stomach lining, but there's no reason to be unduly concerned about the chemical because it's present in a lot of conventional vegetables like beets and spinach and rhubarb, so as long as you're eating in moderation, it's perfectly fine, okay? All right. Okay, now here is that yellow sheep sorrel is the one that I see all the time. This one I only see when I'm in the White Mountains and when I'm on a trail in the woods, like I was today, climbing up Stinson Mountain. We saw this plant. This one is equally edible to the yellow wood sorrel, and it's got that gorgeous white flower with the candy stripes on it. So it's a really fun plant to see out there. So it can be common on some trails, but I typically don't see a lot of it. So this isn't a plant where I would pick a ton of it, but a few leaves as you're hiking, absolutely fine. Okay, so when I make stuff from wild ingredients, I'm not a purist about it. I don't insist that every single ingredient be wild. So when I make that strawberry knotweed pie, for example, I don't use yak butter for the shortening. I can use regular sugar, regular butter is fine, and then knotweed makes it a wild dish. But it is fun to make a wild salad completely from wild ingredients, which is what this one is here. Although I don't want to deter you in any way from just throwing a few chicory flowers into regular salad is fine. You don't have to go whole hog like this, but that's what I did. So anyway, let me tell you what's in this salad. So the yellow flowers are wild mustard flowers. The blue is the chicory flowers. The green is lamb's quarters and chickweed and wood sorrel, sheep sorrel, stuff like that, bulking up the salad. And then the red berries are partridge berries, and then these tomato-like things are called husk tomatoes or ground cherries. All right, so here's partridge berry. This is a plant I saw today, although I didn't see any berries on it. The berries that you would see on the partridge berry plants now would be last year's berries, because this year's berries haven't ripened yet. But it's pretty common for this plant to have berries that persist throughout the entire year, and that, in a way, gives some evidence that the name partridge berry is a little bit inaccurate, because it's not like this is really critical bird and wildlife food, and don't you dare eat a berry because they desperately need it. I don't think so, because why would the berries persist on the plants for months and months? The birds probably know what we know, which is these berries are virtually tasteless. So why eat them? Why even use them? Because they're pretty. So put a few on top of a salad just to add that color in there. And there's certain places like under white pines where you can find quite a lot of these partridge berries. So you're finding a lot. Sure, pick a few, put it on the salad. All right, so here is the ground cherry. So this is also called the husk tomato or strawberry tomato. And you'll see these increasingly commonly in farmers markets and stuff. People are growing them as a crop. They do grow in the wild, though, usually in an agricultural context. So at the edge of a cultivated field or a horse paddock or something like that is where I'll see these plants typically. And the key thing to distinguish the edible ground cherry from the poisonous look-alike is the fact that you can't see the fruit on this plant unless you peel off the husk. All right, so you see down there, there's an immature husk right there. The botanical term for that is a calyx. So the fruit is ripening inside there. And when this ripens, this calyx will eventually turn yellow and then a beige color, and then it falls off the plant. And so that's why it's called a ground cherry, because to harvest the fruit, you actually look underneath the plant on the ground for the ripe fruit that have already fallen off the plant on the ground. And then you have to peel this outer layer off to see the thing that inside looks and tastes like a sweet cherry tomato. So they're really fun to find, and I hope you will. Okay, so here's a plant called evening primrose. Evening primrose is a biennial. That's what it looks like its first year or the beginning of the second year. And at this stage, you can just grab the entire foliage and yank on it and get the taproot out that way, which is the main edible part of this plant. So if we hadn't done that and left it in the ground, eventually it would produce a flower like that. And then there's the root. So that's the main edible part. And so far, my favorite way to use the root is to grate it up and make pancakes with it, like potato pancakes. You can use whatever potato pancake recipe you usually use and just substitute an equivalent amount of the evening primrose root for the potato. It should come out fine. And by the way, you see up there that kind of pinkish coloration near the top of the root? Evening primrose roots always have that, so it's one way to help recognize the plant. Because I admit that this plant is kind of nondescript, doesn't have really distinguishing features. I'm looking for the prominent white midrib on the leaves, and occasionally this would be tinged with pink too. But this one, it's not at the easy end of the spectrum in terms of being able to ID it. I recognize that. All right, but this one is, especially at this stage, when this plant produces the round burrs that get caught in your socks or your dog's fur in the fall. And the guy who invented Velcro did get the idea from these burrs, by the way. So this is a wonderfully edible plant called burdock. And this part isn't edible, but most of the rest of the plant is. And the part that's typically eaten is the root. And this plant is a biennial, so that once again means a 2-year life cycle. So the best time to get the root is between the first and second growing seasons, because after the plant begins to produce its flower stalk and bloom, it's used up the energy in the root to do that, so the root isn't worth eating at that point. But at this stage, the root's edible, but you cannot yank on the burdock foliage and get a root out. You have to dig them up, which is a lot of work, and I don't usually bother. And I pretty much guarantee that your patience will give out before the root does, because it's really long. So you'd be digging and digging and digging, and at some point you say, oh, the heck with it, you slice off what you have with the spade. You might have a length of root about that long. It kept going, and at that stage, the easy way to prepare it is just wash it off. You don't have to peel it or anything. Slice it into half-inch thick rounds, boil it in salted water until it's tender, about 15 minutes, and it will taste like a starchy artichoke. But, true confessions, I'm too lazy to do that. Instead, what I do is I harvest the flower stalk. This is the cylindrical flower stalk growing up from the center of the plant midway through the second year. So in the Boston area, this is the first or second weeks of June. Add a couple weeks to that for northern New Hampshire. So we're probably just beyond the stage right now to harvest the plant, but we just missed it by a couple weeks. And so what I'll do is just cut this at ground level, lop off the top cluster of leaves like that, and that's the part of the stalk I'll gather. So all of these I gathered in less than a half an hour, and that was much faster than digging up the burdock roots. A lot easier on your back. Now you do have to peel the very outer layer off of a burdock stalk because it's bitter and stringy. But unlike the knotweed, the burdock stalks are solid all the way through. So even if you take the outer layer off, you have a lot of food value left after that. And so I chop that up into half-inch thick rounds, and I boil it in salted water until it's tender, which is only about 5 or 6 minutes. And it's delicious just plain, or it's really good thrown in spaghetti sauce, or it's really good in the recipe that I'm sure a lot of you have eaten if you haven't made it yourself, where typically you use artichoke hearts. You mix them with Parmesan cheese and mayonnaise and breadcrumbs, and you bake it in the oven, and it's a spread that you put on crackers. Well, you could substitute the boiled burdock flower stalk rounds for the artichoke hearts in that recipe, and it works great. And there it is right there. So that recipe's on my webpage. So the handout I gave you, which is about drinking birch trees, the bottom of the handout will show you where to find me on the internet, and then you can click on those links and you get to my recipe page, including this recipe right here. Okay. All right, so lamb's quarters, I referred to this earlier. So this plant is a wild spinach. You can use it any way you use spinach, raw or cooked. You do not have to boil it first. By the way, this white mealiness in the center of each plant that's not from the road or anything, that's a natural mealiness the plant produces. It's one of the ways to help identify the plant.
It was in your salad tonight.
Yeah, how about that? It was in your salad tonight, those of you that ate here. Okay, so here's a plant called peppergrass, and it's next to a plant called poor man's pepper, and these plants look very similar. They're related and they taste the same, so if you mix them up, it wouldn't be a problem at all. The nice thing about this one on the left is this one also has a really long season availability. So you can find this one from the spring until November, looking just like this. So it's called peppergrass because these flat, round seed pods near the top of the plant, if you chew on them after a few seconds, it's got a really sharp flavor like watercress or like the nasturtiums we had in the salad today. Because this is a cousin of watercress. So that's peppergrass. And so a few years ago, remember this? I was attending somebody else's natural history program down on Cape Cod, and the leader of our group was making these roast beef and boursin sandwiches. And right outside where she was assembling these sandwiches were a whole bunch of peppergrass plants. So I said, why don't we add the seed pods to the sandwiches? She said, sure. So they were great that way. All right, so this is a plant that grows not that far from here. And it's a plant that country people in New England have known about since the days of the first human inhabitants of this area. In fact, the two city names, Chicago and Winooski, Vermont, were Native American names for this plant right here. And I'll tell you what it is in just a second if you don't know. And anyway, so this is a plant that people that lived in the country would see from time to time, and they might gather it in the spring while they were out, let's say, trout fishing or turkey hunting, and all that was fine. And then, roughly about a dozen years ago, this plant began to experience this meteoric rise in popularity. And it is called, the wild link is the New England name, but we mostly hear of it these days as the ramp, which is the Southern Appalachian name. And about a dozen years ago, the chefs and foodies started hyperventilating about this plant. And there's been, I'm afraid, a bit of a gold rush mentality that's kicked into the heart of some people. And so they'll be walking in the woods looking for something just like that, and they'll see that, and they'll dig up that entire patch and leave nothing behind. And the purpose is not for them to eat it, it's for them to sell it. And the problem is that's a completely unsustainable way of interacting with this plant, because once you dig up that patch, it's not going to come back. That's it, it's gone. In fact, in the Berkshires in Massachusetts where this plant grows, there are places in the woods where I used to counter this plant where it has been totally extirpated. It does not exist anymore. And that's not good. Okay, so besides the sustainability issue on this plant, I mean, this plant, the wild leek, where you're going to find it is growing in very rich woods habitat, the same places where some of our most cherished spring ephemeral wildflowers like to grow, like trilliums and bloodroots and stuff like that. And so people go into the woods in the spring to enjoy the beautiful spring blooming wildflowers. And if they're walking along and they see all these areas that have been strip mined because the ramps have been cleaned out, all this bare soil's left behind, that's not a very pleasant experience for them. So there's that. And then, if any bare soil is behind, you're creating the ideal growing medium for the garlic mustard and the other invasive plants for their seeds to be brought in, perhaps even on the shoes of the people digging up the ramps and getting a toehold in this sensitive rich woods habitat. So that's all bad news. But I'm about to share the good news about this plant. And that
some are left behind, would they regenerate?
This plant grows really slowly. It's 10 years from when a seed germinates to when a plant is big enough to harvest. And so it's being harvested on a scale which, unfortunately, if it's being dug up, in many places it's being dug up at a rate which far exceeds the natural ability to replenish the patch. So anyway, but the good news is you don't have to dig up a plant to eat it. Because here are the leaves. The plants typically have 2 or sometimes 3 leaves attached to the little scallion-like bulb. The leaves are delicious, so you don't have to dig them up. In fact, the word that I've been trying to get out to the chefs and the people that are picking for the chefs, and basically people in general, is to say, would you please consider shifting some, most, perhaps even all of your harvesting to just leaves only, and ideally 1 leaf per plant, leave the remaining leaf or leaves attached to the bulb, leave the bulb on the ground. That's a sustainable way of interacting with the plant. And then we can all enjoy how wonderful the flavor is of the wild leeks, the ramps, without harming the patches or their continued ability to thrive in locations where we're finding them. And so, because, unfortunately, I'm seeing stuff like this, like ramp bulbs that aren't even used. This is one of the most famous restaurants in America, Dan Barber's Blue Hill at Stone Barns restaurant in Westchester. And he's not even using them in his cuisine. He's just selling the bulbs in his pickled bulbs in his gift shop. And I've been after him about this and saying, look, Dan, you don't have to dig up those ramps, and if you stop doing it, you're a trendsetter. Other people will follow your lead. So that was a conversation I had with him quite a while ago. Perhaps he has seen the light and is now just using the leaves. But anyway, and even unfortunately the food co-ops were getting into the act and selling plants with the bulbs attached. And they got the little word local on there. And the typical shopper's going to say, local, local, I'm supposed to buy local. I'm going to buy that because it's local. I'm a good person because I'm buying local. Well, not really if you're digging, buying these unsustainably harvested wild leeks that were dug up. So anyway, but I have a good story about a food co-op. So several years ago, I get an email, and the subject line is wild ramps, and I thought, oh great, some foodie has tracked me down and they want me to divulge the location of some wild leek patch they could go and plunder it. And I was wrong. The email was from the produce manager of the Hunger Mountain Food Co-op, which is the one that serves Montpelier, Vermont. And he was writing to tell me that they had decided to sell little bags of ramp leaves only, 1 leaf per plant harvested. And he wanted permission from me to put a little statement for me in each bag to explain why that was a good idea. And I was so grateful for that. Thanked him profusely for doing that. So, and there's another bit of good news about the ramps, is you can propagate them. And so that's what the New England Wildflower Society is doing in a very controlled way through these stock beds, where they pack them full of ramps and they can pull a few off and sell them to customers. And as long as they leave enough to fill that box again, then they're doing it on a sustainable level. And so people can go to the New England Wildflower Society's Garden Woods in Framingham and buy the ramp plants and then plant them in the yard, and then they'll have their own ramp patch right there that they can harvest from. Which is fine, great. But if they do that, I bet they don't dig those plants up, because that would be like killing the goose that laid the golden egg. No, they would just pick a leaf off occasionally and enjoy the flavor and allow the plants to continue to thrive in that location. All right, so I'm going to get off my soapbox for now, but I will talk about one other plant I'm a little concerned about a little bit later in the show. All right, but you really need to be in the far western portion of the White Mountains. So we're pretty close here. But you probably need to be a town over where you get a little bit more of the higher pH effect of being near Vermont. So you're going to see the wild leeks much more frequently in Vermont than New Hampshire. But this is the plant that looks a lot like the wild leek that you are going to see frequently in New Hampshire. This is called Clintonia, or corn lily, bluebeet lily. And it is actually related to the ramps. They're both cousins of lilies. Anyway, this one's edible too. Not now. It's only edible in the spring, like in May, when it first comes up and the leaves are like 3 or 4 inches long. They taste exactly like the outside of a cucumber. So the great for just chopping up and putting into salads. Now the flavor isn't any good. So now they've actually bloomed, they're forming the berries now. It's way too late to eat them. But at least, this is a relatively numerous plant. If you're hiking the woods and you want to get, a few leaves to put into your sandwich, and, while you're having a picnic on the trail, that'd be great to do that in the spring sometime. All right. So so this one likes acid soil. The wild leek likes a more neutral or slightly alkaline soil. But occasionally you can find them growing together. So I took this photo in New Hampshire, not that far from here. And so you see the Clintonia leaves right here and the ramp leaves growing right next to each other. So how do you tell them apart? Well, just a simple scrunch up of a leaf would do it. Scrunch up a Clintonia leaf, it's going to smell like a cucumber. Scrunch up the ramp leaf, it's going to smell like onions and garlic. And then you know right away which one it was. All right. Okay, so here's another plant that the word I've heard to describe this plant is locally abundant. So certain trails here in the White Mountains, you can see hundreds of this plant. So this is called the Indian cucumber. And the edible part is the root. So there it is down there. And the root tastes like a starchy cucumber, almost like a jicama. And it's very nice. All right. But you basically have to kill the plant to harvest the roots. So this is something that you don't want to do lightly. You want to make sure you're seeing, like at least 100 plants along the trail before you think of digging up any. But if you're seeing the plant in that profusion, and on my hike this afternoon I did see the plant in that profusion, then it's fine to harvest a few roots and enjoy the flavor. All right, so this is what a mature Indian cucumber looks like with the berries on it. You can harvest the roots any time of year you can find the plant. So at this stage it would be good, and actually at this stage, what you could do to try to help with the sustainability of the harvest of this plant is you could take these ripe berries and just drop them into the hole that you created when you pulled up the root, and that might help the plant continue to thrive in that location. All right. There is one other conservation issue you need to be concerned about, though, if you want to harvest the Indian cucumber, and that is this plant right here. This is a listed orchid. This is a federally listed endangered species called the small whorled begonia. All right, so just once again, so you see the botanical name for Indian cucumber is Mediola virginiana. The botanical name for the small whorled begonia is Isotria medioides, which means looks like Indian cucumber. Right. So how do you tell them apart? One way to tell them apart is you see that the flower on this is different, but let's assume that the flowers aren't out and you're just looking at the leaves. The leaves look very similar. Well, here's how to tell the difference. I'll go back a slide here. The bigger Indian cucumber plants have this double-decker effect where you have the whorl leaves here and then like a 4 or 5 inch length of stem and then another whorl of leaves where the flowers and the fruits form. And so if you're only harvesting the double-decker plants, you'll never pick the rare orchid by mistake. Okay? Alright. Okay, so I am going to talk about mushrooms in this show, but not so much at this point of the show because we're still in the spring portion of the show. So, but there is one mushroom that mushroom hunters will make an attempt to try to find in the spring. And I say attempt because this is the morel, and morels are maddeningly elusive. They will kick you in the behind. They're very difficult to find in eastern Mass. In western New England, so getting into western Mass, Vermont, they're a little bit easier, but because they tend to like a less acidic soil. But anyway, this black morel I have found not way off in the wilderness somewhere, but just right near civilization, just often right near somebody's house, just in the pea gravel by the foundation of the house, which was going on here, or by the shrubbery, or just by the mulch, or by the walkway, something like that. And sometimes you can find a lot of them. So all these black morels came from one person's yard down outside of Boston. All right, now, do we have any kids in the audience? Okay, looks like we don't. So I don't have to explain what that is. Okay, because they won't know what that film canister is there. So that's the photo for scale, so you know how big the mushrooms are. All right, but anyway, you understand what I was doing. Okay, so, all right, now here's the yellow morel, and this one I typically find under, in this part of the world, I would find them under recently dead elm trees where the bark is still attached to the tree and it hasn't sloughed off yet, or older apple trees. And in Massachusetts, the weekend I look for the yellow morels is Mother's Day weekend, so I would probably add a week to that and look for them the weekend later up here in New Hampshire. And whether it's a black morel or the yellow morel, they're quite good. So so all these yellow morels came from one person's yard in Pepperell, Mass, which is just below the New Hampshire line. So, but the morels are maddeningly elusive. There's no getting around that, but they do. So I hope you find them. Okay, but this plant definitely grows up here. We saw this one right by the Rumney General Store. This is black locust. This is categorized as an invasive species, so it's a guilt-free foraging opportunity. It has one edible stage that's only available for about a 3-week period. In Massachusetts, that's the second half of May. Up here, it would be through mid-June you'd be able to find this stage. Maybe even the 3rd week of June you might be able to find it. And it's the flowers. The flowers, the edible part. The flowers are wonderful. They smell like jasmine and they taste like sweet pea pods. So they're great for just, another thing would have been great in the salad today. Put them into salad, straight into your mouth right off the plant. Now, okay, so there's a bumblebee in there. So yeah, sure, the pollinators visit these trees, but these trees get 30, 40, 50 feet tall. Let them fly up in the upper branches and work those flowers. The lower flowers, you can pick. There's tons of flowers all over this tree, so don't worry about the pollinators. They'll have plenty of flowers to visit. All right? Okay, so this one's good raw. Then there's also, after you pick the flowers off the central stalks, you can eat them right on the spot or add them to various things. And one really great way to use them is to make fritters from them. So there's the black locust fritters. This recipe's in my book, and I highly recommend it. All right, so here's pokeweed, and pokeweed you're going to run into a little bit more as you travel further south. It tends to thin out as you go further north in New England. But it's the shoots that are edible when the shoots are about 6 to 10 inches tall. And this is around the same time the black locust flowers are blooming. And you have to boil them for 7 minutes to make them safe to eat. And this is what a pokeweed shoot looks like. And you might, so that's the harvestable stage like that. So you might say to yourself, okay, pokeweed shoot, but how do I know that's a pokeweed shoot? There's got to be other things that look like that. And the answer is yes, there are other things that look like that. So what you can do, I do this, no, we're going to go the other way. Come on. All right, see this thing right here? That's the dried stalk from last year's pokeweed plant. And that will still be there when the shoots are coming out for the current year's crop of the shoots that you want to eat. And that dried stalk will be going into the ground at the exact same spot that the new shoots will be coming up. So if you're seeing that, you know for sure it's a pokeweed shoot. All right. So, whoops, still the wrong direction. Okay. All right, this plant we saw here and on the road on the way to here. So this is the common milkweed, the only edible member of the Asclepias genus that I know of. And the common milkweed has fat leaves and milky juice. Not even, all milkweeds don't even have milky juice, which is interesting. So this is the one you're most likely to find too. And I call it a procrastinating forager's dream food because there's at least 4 edible stages to the plant. And they happen chronologically in succession. So if you mess up and miss a stage, you just wait a while until the next edible stage develops. So this is stage number 3 right here. And it's the flower buds when they're in a tight green cluster. And use the same cooking method for milkweed they use for pokeweed, is you boil whatever milkweed part you're cooking and you boil it for 7 minutes. So it's the milkweed shoots when they first come up in the spring. It's the leaves off the slightly older shoots, the milkweed flower buds, and let me just go to the next slide. Okay, so these flower buds have already been cooked for 7 minutes, and look how well they held up. If anything, they look better than they did when they were on the plant. And you can eat them as a vegetable just like that if you wanted to, with butter or holiday sauce or whatever, red sauce. But or you can incorporate them into different dishes. Like here's a dish from my book, the milkweed egg puff, which tastes like a cross between a souffle and a casserole, and it's very good. And you can also put other things in there like wild mushrooms, so that's a nice versatile recipe. Okay, and then the last part of milkweed that's edible are the pods. The pods that eventually will get like 5 inches long and split open, and then the seeds are showing and stuff like that. So way, way before that stage, when the pods are up to 1.5 inches long, nice and firm to the touch and not springy or spongy, you can eat them after boiling for 7 minutes, and the texture and the flavor is very similar to green beans. All right, but here is the monarch butterfly caterpillar to remind us that this is indeed one of the milkweed plants that the monarch butterflies seek out to lay their eggs on, and the caterpillars eat the leaves and so on. And when I led that walk at Fisher's Island just a couple of days ago, we found a monarch egg on one of the leaves as I was demonstrating the plant to people. That's rarity for me because I'm showing this plant to people all the time. But anyway, I have been assured by ecologists that the foragers are not responsible for the decline in the monarch populations, but even so, I'm actively trying to get more milkweed out there. So I am propagating this plant from seed. I'm planting it out in the landscape. But even if all you did is in the fall, when you're traveling around, you see an old field with a lot of milkweed plants in it, where the mature pods have split open and the white parachute-y stuff attached to the seeds is showing, gather up some of that. And as you're traveling around, you see some nice, good, old field milkweed habitat without any milkweed plants in it. Just release some of those parachutes and help start a new colony. That'd be great. Okay. Cattails, so you have cattails up this far. So how many of you know who Buell Gibbons was? Okay. Oh, all right. So usually this is an age test, and the age keeps going up. So the age is now about 45, where people above 45 have a much greater chance of have heard this guy than people under that age. And the reason is he died in 1975. And so anyway, so he called cattails the supermarket of the swamps because there's so many edible parts to them. So this is all explained in my book, but I'll just briefly cover them. So there's these ropey rhizomes below the surface of the marsh that they're stuffed with starch, and you can process that starch out of them and then bake with it. And then there's these little sprouts underneath the surface of the muck that you can eat. It's just bud for next year's cattail, and you can steam those like a little Brussels sprout. And then the cattail heart, I'll show you that in a second, but that's developing in here at the same time that the immature flower is developing. So this is the 4th stage. So you see a swelling near the top of the stalk, and if you peel the outer leaves off, then that's what it looks like inside. And this is the male flower on top and the female flower at the bottom. And you just boil or steam them until they're tender, and it tastes like a cross between corn and artichokes. So at the same time I'm harvesting these, I'm usually harvesting the cattail heart. So, so that's just, you peel the outer leaves away on the stem of the cattail, and then it gets very soft and flexible, and that's a heart which tastes like cucumber, and it's very similar to hearts of palm. It's a very nice vegetable. There's one part left to eat on the cattail, and that's the pollen. And so it's hypoallergenic, by the way. So you just go into the cattail marsh with a plastic bag and just bend the male flowers into the bag and give them a little shake, and this big cloud of yellow pollen comes off. And just keep repeating that, and after a while you'll have a cup or more of the pollen, and then you want to put it through a fine mesh sieve just to take out any twigs or bugs or whatever might be in there. And then you add the cattail pollen to flour to make these very nutritious and very pretty cattail pollen baked products like these corn muffins. Alright, so here is a plant that looks a lot like cattail but isn't, and this does grow up here. Anybody know what this plant is? I'm ready to award a gold star for anybody that knows this plant.
Yellow iris?
No. Yes, very good. Bing, 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 calamus. Yes, good job. Yes. So this is called sweet flag, is another name for it, and the leaves are more yellow green than cattail, and it doesn't get as tall. It gets about 2.5 feet tall, but it grows in similar conditions to where cattails grow. And my favorite part to eat on the calamus plant is when the plant comes up in the spring. You just peel these outer leaves away to keep the tender, naturally, what's the word I want to use? Well, they're hidden from the sun, so they're kind of blanched. Anyway, that's what a calamus flower looks like. So it doesn't come out of the top like a cattail one. It sticks out like a thumb from the side of the leaf. All right, anybody know what this plant is? I bet most of you have eaten this plant. I'm not talking about the purple loosestrife here. All right, I will just tell you, this is wild rice. And wild rice does grow in New England, and I do know people that have gathered their own wild rice and processed it and eaten it. I have not done it. It is a lot of work. You have to pick it, big deal. I pick stuff all the time, but then you have to parch it, you have to winnow it, and it can be done. I know people have done it in New England. I just haven't done it myself. And what I do is buy the wild rice from the Jewelweed Indian tribe that's still collecting it in the traditional way with the canoes in the lakes in northern Minnesota, and they'll just paddle through as the plants are ripe, and they bend the mature plant over the boat, and they whack it with a stick, and the ripe grains fall into the boat, and they're collecting it that way. And they're parching and winnowing hundreds and hundreds of pounds at a time, and at that scale it makes a lot more sense. But you could do it here in New England if you wanted to. Okay, so here is the native basswood tree. So this is the one you're most likely to run into in the countryside up here. If you go into the cities, you're going to run into the European import, the Tilia cordata. But whether it's the Tilia americana or the Tilia cordata, it's usable the exact same way. You can eat the young leaves on these plants. You can also make a tea from the flowers. And it has a delightful lemon honey flavor. It also has two medicinal uses. It's soothing to your digestive system and your mental state at the same time. It's a very popular herbal tea in Europe for that reason.
Is it the same as linden?
Yes. Yes. Did I not say that? Okay. Yes, so another name for it is American linden. Right. Yeah. So linden is usually used for the European members of the genus Tilia, but it's the same thing. So whether it's basswood, which is the American plant, or the little leaf linden, which is brought in from Europe, use it the exact same way. Okay, so let's see which button I can push here to advance this thing. Okay, so if you're driving around New Hampshire in the spring, you're very likely to know this plant. Perhaps you didn't know what it was, but what it was the genus Amelanchier, which is called shadbush, shadblow, serviceberry, saskatoon, juneberry. It's all the same thing, genus Amelanchier. And there's at least 8 different species, and they hybridize, and so. But you don't need to know what exact species you have, because the fruit tastes the same pretty much in all of them. And when it's the springtime, that's the best time to actually figure out where the Juneberry plants are because they stand out really readily from the surrounding drab vegetation. This is one of the first things to bloom. So it's even before the crab apples and apple trees bloom, this one's blooming. And so remember where that location is, and then look for the fruit in June. Actually, in New Hampshire, especially the White Mountains, this plant ought to be called Julyberry because the fruit is not ripe in June. So anyway, so the fruit looks like a blueberry, but it actually tastes more like a cherry crossed with an almond. And it's actually related to cherries and almonds. They're all related members of the rose family. So this is a great fruit for stuffing your face right by the tree, or the bush, as it were. And you can make stuff from the fruit. There's a recipe in my book for Juneberry muffins, which uses fresh Juneberries or dried Juneberries or frozen Juneberries. It comes out whichever one you use. And then mulberries. So these, perhaps, this isn't very common in the White Mountains. You have to go further south to run into it. But where I'm from, Juneberries and mulberries are ripe at the same time, so I often harvest them together, and then I'll use them both in a strudel, which is really nice. All right, now here's a plant that you'll encounter sometimes in northern New England, and this is one of the edible gooseberries. So whether all members of the ribes genus are edible and not poisonous. So whatever variety you eat of gooseberries and currants, you just decide, do I like it or not? But this one I encounter in New England, and it's our local counterpart. If any of you have been to Europe, especially this time of year, you go to the farmers markets in Europe and you'll see a cultivated version of this red currant. This pretty much has the same flavor as what they grows across Europe. Okay, and there's another version of it, this one I tend to see along the coast, but it could grow here. This one I saw just a short distance from here. This is called the flowering raspberry, and this one will be worth growing in your yard, and for no other reason just to look at it, because it's a really pretty plant. It has these enormous maple-like leaves, these very large, showy magenta-colored flowers, and it also produces an edible fruit. Isn't that fun? So that's what it looks like when it blooms, and then later on in the summer, there's the fruit. It's not the tastiest member of the raspberry family of fruits, but it is edible. And the plants don't have thorns, so you don't have to worry about pricker harvesting. Yes?
Is that also called thimbleberry?
It isn't, but thimbleberry...
Can you talk about thimbleberry?
Sure. Thimbleberry doesn't really grow here in New England. It grows in the Midwest and it grows on the West Coast. It's a very close relative of this. And so if you mix them up, there's absolutely no downside to them at all. They're very similar looking.
Great. I've heard about bad reactions to thimbleberry.
Oh, really? Eating them?
Actually, it's after you eat them.
What happens?
Processing them for you.
Your bum gets incredibly itchy for weeks.
Oh, weeks?
We've never eaten them, but we have a lot of that
Right.
plant, and we've just been like, ooh, stay away from it.
Well, thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
Just what we've heard. We haven't experienced.
It's never happened to me.
Yeah.
And it might be that our plant doesn't have that issue. And it could be, sometimes there's some fruits that, the body has trouble with when it's raw, and when you cook it, that aspect goes away. So you might, I don't know if you had this problem with cooked thimbleberries.
We've never had, we were
so,
told at a farmer's market.
Oh, okay.
We were told, do not eat this one.
Okay, so it is completely safely edible, and I'm sorry that another one might have that problem.
We're happy.
Okay, so here's the black raspberry. That was part of our dessert tonight. It was lovely, and this one grows wild. And this plant does you a big favor, is it shows you where it grows out of season. Because in the off season it has this purple color on the thorny canes. And you can see that color at a great distance. So you could be cross-country skiing in the middle of wintertime, and far off on the edge of the field you see that purple color, and that would be the black raspberries. Remember where that spot is, and then go back in July to pick the fruit. Okay, now if you're in far northern New England, or down East Maine, or you're at some of the mountaintops, and I can't vouch for this in the White Mountains, I'm sorry, I don't know for sure. But anyway, certainly as you get into Quebec and the Maritime provinces, you're going to find this really cool member of the Rupus genus called a cloudberry, or bake apple, which is what they call them in Newfoundland. And it's because these fruits actually taste like a baked apple. but it's a member of the rubus genus, so it's related to the black raspberry and the flower raspberry that I showed you before. So so this is a lot of these other plants won't go that far north, but you'll find plants like this that are more sort of boggy, tundra-y type plants. So look for that one. It's fun thing. Okay, so getting back to the more normal things that you're likely to run into all the time. This one, purslane, which I'm sure is here at D Acres, and as you typically see it in farms and gardens, and it will not show up until the hot weather kicks in. So you wouldn't find it in April, or maybe the end of May it would start to show up, but it isn't really until June you really see it. And all the fleshy above ground part of the plants are edible, so the leaves are edible, the stems are edible. You can eat it raw, you can eat it cooked. And I'm going to show you with this plant an easy way to use the plant that requires no cooking skill whatsoever, and that is to add the purslane leaves to gazpacho. And you don't even have to make the gazpacho. You could go to the fancy food store and buy the gazpacho, and then just throw the purslane leaves in there, and the texture of the purslane leaves works really well in a gazpacho. All right, so here's daylilies, a common sight along the roadside here in New Hampshire. And so this is one where if you're going to harvest it, you probably don't want to harvest it from your neighbor's mailbox. Unless the neighbor, of course, says, fine, pick all you want, but I do see this plant growing wild too. The tubers, which I haven't showed you in the photo here, below the ground, they're edible. The crowns, the clusters of leaves when the plant first comes up are edible. The flower buds, the open flowers, and the wilted flowers are all edible. And I bet a lot of you have eaten daylily flowers because they're standard ingredients to Chinese food dishes, mushu and hot sour soup. Typically use dried daylily flowers. All right, so
The hybrids, are they all edible?
No. The problem with daylilies is that relatively recently, some of the plant breeders are getting a little high-tech in experimenting with daylilies, and I think they might even be crossing the species boundary with stuff that they're growing. So the only ones I can vouch for are the tall, orange-flowered daylilies. And that's the kind you're typically going to see anyway, so those are fine. But the other weird colors or stunted, short, dwarf ones, I just don't know if they're safe or not. All right, so the other issue about this plant, the reason I say with caution here, is because for a relatively small segment of the population, less than 20%, there's a chemical in daylilies that might not agree with your digestive system. So if you're one of those people and you eat the daylilies, you might discover, you might have you might feel nauseous or have a loose bowel movement after you eat the daylilies, and you'll get better right away. You won't have flashbacks later on or anything. You'll just know that daylilies don't agree with your digestive system. And it seems to be most prevalent with the raw tubers, but it could possibly happen with other parts of the plant too. So just pass it on to you in case you're one of those people. Okay, so jewelweed, this really common plant up here in the summer, and you'll see it in somewhat sunny edges, usually where it's a little damp. And let's talk about the medicinal value too. So jewelweed has been clinically proven to cure poison ivy for some people. And just take the entire plant. This time of year it's still pretty juicy. Just scrunch it up, get the juice out, and then rub that juice on a place where you either have poison ivy or where you think you're exposed to poison ivy. And if you want that remedy available year-round, what you can do is just gather up a bunch of that plant, bring it home, throw it into a pot with some water, boil it up, and then pour that liquid into ice cube trays and freeze it. And then you can just take an ice cube and put that on your skin. And some people claim that the jewelweed juice is good for all kinds of skin irritations, even aphids. All right. But there is an edible part to jewelweed. The edible part are the seeds. The ripe seeds are in seed pods that look like that. The tricky part is when those seed pods are ripe, they detonate at the slightest touch. So one nickname for this plant is touch me not, because if you brush against the plant when the ripe seed pods are on there, they just go psh, 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 they shoot all over the place. So if you want to eat those seeds, what you need to do is sneak up on a ripe seed pod and grab it and have it explode in your hand. Don't worry, it won't hurt. Then when you open up your hand, so there's the ripe seed pod, that's what you want to look for. And you grab it, it's going to explode like that. And then letter D are the ripe seeds, and if you eat them, they taste just like walnuts. And And another cool thing you could do with the jewelweed seeds, and you don't need to do this to eat them, but just to see, is if you gently rub the outer covering off a ripe jewelweed seed, the inner color is this beautiful, bright robin's egg blue color. And I have no idea why Mother Nature put that color in there, because no creatures ever see it. It's just one of those unexplained mysteries. All right, so here is the common elder. Up here you have the red-berried elder too, which as far as I know is not edible. And that one has pyramidal shaped flower clusters and pyramidal shaped berry clusters. This one has a flat-topped flower cluster and a flat-topped berry cluster. And the berries are black on its right. So, okay, so here's the elderberry blooming, and this is another plant that, at least in southern New England, I'm hearing a fair amount of hyperventilating going on amongst the foodie set on this one. And I'm a little nervous that this might become the next ramp, that the chefs will all of a sudden say, you know, I got to have this on my menu, and they start cleaning out the wild populations of the elderflower, which could be potentially harmful, as I'll explain in detail in just a second. So, and some people will pick this flower to make fritters from it, but the black locust plant makes those flowers make much tastier fritters than these do. So I like to leave the flowers on the plant. So let me just talk a little bit more about the impact. Okay, here we go. All right. So remember, at the beginning of my talk, I said that native plant species often are important for animals, native animals, as they rely upon those plants for some important portion of their life cycle. So here's an example of that. So here's the elderberry boar beetle, really cool looking beetle. It spends more or less its entire life associated with elderberry plants to some degree. So the adults are mating on the elderberry plant, the female laying the eggs on the elderberry plant. The larvae live inside the plant. They don't harm the plants at all. The beetle and the plant have co-evolved for millennia. So if, you know, the foodie starts tripping all the flowers off to, you know, sell to restaurants and stuff, that means no berries are going to form in the plant. And if the berries don't form, the plant's going to have trouble reproducing in the wild. So that's what I worry about. So anyway, so hopefully that will not happen. So if you leave the flowers on the plant, then you get the berries. And this photo isn't upside down. That's what the berries clusters do from the weight of the fruit. And it isn't good to eat elderberries raw straight off the plant. You get a stomachache from that. But if you dry the elderberry first, or you cook them first, they're fine. Okay, here's a plant called sweet fern that will grow in poor soil because it can make its own nitrogen fertilizer. And this is one of the native species that colonists turned to make tea from during the Revolutionary War era, when they boycotted the British tea. Here's hog peanut, which I thought we were going to see along the trail today, but we didn't. And this is a very delicate member of the pea family that I see along woods roads, like old logging roads. And the main edible part of these little subterranean little peas, whoops, let me go back. Subterranean little peas like that. So this is not a plant that you can gather a huge amount from, but if you're out camping and you've got lots of leisure time, you could probably dig up about a cup of those in an hour. And that would be a nice addition to the other food that you already have. Okay, so then there's black cherry. And black cherries will vary in flavor from tree to tree. Sometimes they're puckery and astringent, and other times they can be quite sweet. So if you taste a black cherry and you're not impressed, don't give up. Try another one. And then up here, you're more likely to see this one, the fire cherry. And these might be ripe now or very soon. This is one of the earlier cherries to ripen. So it ripens before the choke cherries up here. And these fruit are small. There's no getting around that. But thank God the pit inside each fruit is smaller than a conventional cherry pit. So there's a fair amount of pulp in each of these. And they nicely grow in clusters like this. So you just go and pick a whole bunch and just shove the whole thing in your mouth. You just roll it around and get the pulp off your mouth. And then unless you're going to try and propagate this plant from the pits, which I have done, just spit the pits out in a place where you hope some more pin cherries will grow. And then you get some more, hopefully. All right. So wintergreen, this is all over the place up here, which is great. And it has the wintergreen flavor. And so you can make it from the young leaves. And then the red berries have wintergreen flavor too. They're not really sweet, but they do have that wintergreen flavor. But here's another plant that we don't have nearly as frequently as you do up here in the White Mountains. It's a really cool plant. If you don't know it, I encourage you all to look for it. especially as we move on later in the summer. It's a plant called creeping snowberry, and it has these white fruits that are about the same size and shape and flavor as wintergreen flavored Tic Tac. So it's really fun to find these on the trail. Just eat these little white berries, and they're wintergreen flavored and tart. So a very pleasant thing to nibble on. And these teeny tiny leaves that are barely 1/8 of an inch wide, you could also make you could make a wintergreen beverage from those if you wanted to. But when I tend to think of wintergreen, a wintergreen drink, I'm usually going to make it from the black or yellow birch tree, because it's much easier and much less impact on the plant to harvest these, because you basically take the twigs and you peel them, and you just take the twigs and the peelings and you stuff it in a jar like that. You just let it sit around for an hour or so, and that's how you get a strong flavored wintergreen tea. So the handout that I gave you, and remind me at the end if you didn't get one, I'll give you one, tells you how to do that. And it tells you how to tap birch trees for sap too, which you can also do. Okay, bunchberry grows up here, pretty common. The berries don't have a lot of flavor, but you could eat them. They're perfectly safe to eat. Then you have several species of viburnum that grow up here that are edible, including this wild raisin, and then the nannyberry. But the one that you're most likely to find is this one, the hobblebush, also called moosewood. And we saw a ton of this along the trail today. The fruit won't be ripe until September, and you'll see that it starts out green, and then it turns red, and then when it's fully ripe, it's black like that. And it will taste like the texture's like a prune, and then it's got this interesting, spicy, almost like cloves flavor added to it. So it's a very fun thing to nibble on as you're going down the trail. And that's probably the best time to eat it, because if you try to make something from it, like a hobblebush sauce, it'll just taste like prune sauce, the kind of distinctive character for it. It's a lot of work, because each of these fruits has a large flat stone in the center, which is what the viburnum seed is. So I encourage you to do that if you just want to do it as a fun stunt, just to impress your friends. Just make a hobblebush sauce. But you could also just nibble on it as you encounter it along the trail in September. It's a great way to eat it. All right. And it also is a really underappreciated fall foliage. And here's the wild grapes. So these are great for stuffing your face right by the plant. And then you can also make stuff with them, like cheesecake. And then this one I tend to see further south, but some people prefer to use this for stuffed grape leaf recipes. You can actually use any variety of grape leaf for stuffed grape leaves. You just want to do it earlier in the season, because the leaves are already getting a little bit too tough and bitter. So there's the stuffed grape leaves. Okay, so here is the sumac, and this one is quite common here, and you make a drink from this, and I can explain how to do that. So you pick the fruit off the plant right there, and then here's how you make it. So you just take these ripe sumac clusters, and you put them in the water, and then you just pulverize them in the water for a few minutes, and it will turn the water this reddish-orange color. I've made some sumac-ade for you from a different species of sumac that isn't as red as this one, so you'll see it's paler, but you'll get the idea from drinking this, what it tastes like. And then just put it through any kind of a filter, just to strain it, and then there's your sumac-ade. So I typically serve it sweetened and cold, but you could drink it however you like. And the entire time it takes from picking the fruit to drinking the drink is usually less than a half an hour. Okay, and sumac's another fall foliage, underappreciated fall foliage. Okay. So finally got to some more mushrooms in the show. How are you all holding up?
Yeah.
You're doing good? I realize this is a long talk. I realize I'm firing a huge amount of information at you, and I know that a lot of it's just going to bounce out of your brain because it's a lot of stuff. But at least I'm giving you the flavor, figuratively if not literally, of what's out there that you can be nibbling on. All right. So here are the mushrooms. So let me start out with the bad news. All right. The risk of picking the wrong kind of mushroom and getting very sick and possibly even dying is significant. All right? So this is not something to mess with, all right? You need to know what you're doing when you harvest mushrooms, because unfortunately some of the most lethal mushrooms out there, there's absolutely no indication from the flavor there's anything to worry about. So you could have this delicious mushroom one day and be dead several days later from liver and or kidney failure. Right? Having said that, you can arrange all the mushroom species there are in a line and clustered at one end of those species that are virtually impossible to confuse with anything poisonous, versus those at the other end of the line that even the experts can't tell apart. And as long as you stay at the safe end of the line, you gradually work your way out as you gain experience and confidence. That's how you stay out of trouble. Everybody get that? Great. So, I consider the beginning of mushroom season, the main mushroom season in New England, to be the 4th of July. And then from then until Columbus Day, that's when you can see the greatest quantity and variety of mushrooms, provided that it's been wet enough. And in the brief walk that we had this afternoon, we saw quite a few mushrooms. So I think on my walk tomorrow, hopefully we'll see more. Anyway, this is one that's way at the safe end of the line. There are no poisonous lookalikes. There's one edible lookalike. I'll show you in a second. This is called the sulfur shelf mushroom, or the chicken mushroom. And the way to identify this is the top layer is pumpkin orange in color. The bottom layer is sulfur yellow, like the sulfur used to work with in chemistry class, that color. And it's growing in layers directly on wood, usually an oak tree. It can be a standing tree, or a log, or a stump, is where you're going to see it. And this one is a polypore, which means it has no gills. So you look underneath the cap, there's no gills there. It's just pores that are dropping the spores. And so it's the tender meat on this that if you pull it apart and cut into it, you'll see it looks just like the breast meat on a chicken. So that's why it's called the chicken mushroom. So that's that one.
There is 2 species of that too.
Well, here's the other one.
Yeah,
Yeah, right. So this one tends to be more of a pink and white variant on the sulfur shell, but this one is at least as tasty as the yellow and orange one. And same deal, the best flesh is going to be this stuff on the outside. It'll be the most tender and digestible. Did you have a question? No, in the back? No question? All right, good. All right. Okay. The French call this mushroom trompette de mort, which means trumpets of death. And that's only because it's black. It's actually a totally safe, wonderfully edible mushroom with no poisonous lookalike called the black trumpet chanterelle. And this one definitely comes out in this area of the White Mountains. I didn't see it today, as I suspect it's just a little bit too early for it. But as we get into later in the summer, certainly within the next several weeks, it should be showing up. And sometimes, well, the trickiest part about this mushroom is finding the first one, because they're small. They're usually 2 to maybe 3 inches tall. And they're black, and they're a little hard to see. But once you see the first one, stop in your tracks and look around. And it is very likely that you'll see dozens more, sometimes hundreds more. I've definitely seen that many of them in this part of New Hampshire. So this mushroom, it's very yummy, and this is one of the species that dries very well. So if you luck out and you find more than you can use right away, you can dry them and store them in your pantry, and they'll keep you years until you're ready to use them. Okay, now here is what I would call the regular chanterelle. And this one isn't at the safe end of the line. There is a false chanterelle. If you know what you're doing, they're easy to tell apart, but this one does have lookalikes. I'll just be honest with you and say that. But what I do is I look for the color of the cap and the stem and the ridges underneath all be the same color. That's one way to tell it apart from the false chanterelle. And this color right here is the same as an egg yolk or the center stripe in the middle of the highway. And these typically grow singly on the ground. So I kind of smush them together to get in this photo here, but you usually see them spread out a little bit lower density. And these are very loyal to the spots where you find them. So if you do encounter chanterelles, remember where that spot is, and around that same time, in subsequent years, you should find chanterelles in that exact same spot. And these mushrooms don't dry well, but they're, very much appreciated by mushroom hunters, and they're good with eggs and, lots of other ways. So that's the other thing you want to look for. The ridges, they're not true gills, they're what are known as decurrent. As they run down the stem like that, they don't stop right at the top of the cap like your store-bought button mushroom gills do. Okay. All right. So there's a bunch of chanterelles in the center there, and surrounding them is an interesting mushroom called a lobster mushroom. And this is actually a fungus growing on a fungus. So what happens then, a white mushroom starts growing first. The white mushroom is not edible, and it's colonized by this cooked lobster-colored mold that grows on it. And it converts what was an inedible mushroom into an edible mushroom. And the lobster mushroom is very meaty. It's not slimy at all. So if one reason that puts you off of mushrooms, you don't like the slimy taste, you wouldn't find that to be the case with the lobster mushroom. Okay, so this is called the Hygrophorus milky, and I see this other places, but I often see it associated with this haircat moss. And so if you look right here where I rub the gills, milk comes out. There are many members of the Lactarius genus in the mushroom world. They're not all edible, so you just have to kind of learn them one at a time. But this is one of the edible ones, the Hygrophorus milky. Here's another mushroom that grows in that same kind of moss called the grayling mushroom. These I see not this time of year, but later on in the season they're out. And this one has poisons look-alike, so it's a bit of a challenge unless you're pretty accomplished mushroom. This one is a very safe mushroom. This is called the hedgehog or the sweet-tooth mushroom. We saw some little babies just starting to grow now. So this one, later on in the season, September, maybe even October, you'll be able to find these. And they have a soft, felty color, feel to them. And they often will come in kind of a flesh color. And they will occasionally be a little bitter, but other than that, they're perfectly safe to eat. And if those of you in the back that can't see, those in the front can see this. If you look on the underside of the cap, it has teeth hanging down like the roof of a cave. And there are no poisonous tooth mushrooms. So there are some that are bitter and don't taste good, but this one usually tastes quite good. All right. So the only look-alike to the mushroom in the center of this photo is a volleyball. That is a giant puffball mushroom. And that's not even a particularly large one. They can be more than twice that big. And those mushrooms are edible as long as they're nice and firm. When you cut into them, they're white. You don't want them to be yellow, green, or any other color. And the standard way to cook those is to slice them into half-inch thick steaks and then roll it into a beaten egg and then in some seasoned cracker crumbs or breadcrumbs and fry it in a skillet in some butter and make country fried puffball steaks. And that mushroom can easily feed everybody in that photo. All right? Okay. Then this is a porcini, a Boletus edulis mushroom, and we get these in southern New England, and they do occur in northern New England. And at least one time when I led a wild edibles walk at the acres, we found this mushroom. So hopefully we'll find some tomorrow on the walk. That'd be nice. So this is in the bolete group of mushrooms, which is relatively safe. There are a few that could cause you stomach upset, and this very uncommon one that I don't think grows around here that could get you into some serious medical trouble. But in general, this is a relatively safe thing. And so this Boletus edulis, what you want to look for, let me just go ahead and slide. The color of the cap is like a loaf of baked bread. And then the spongy layer on the underside of the cap is this olive yellow color in a mature specimen. And on the younger ones, it's white. But the key distinguishing feature on the porcini, the Boletus edulis mushroom, is up here. Near the top of the stalk, you see this fine net-like marking called a reticulation. It's like somebody took a piece of gauze and wrapped the top of the stalk with it. So that, definitely look for that when you are evaluating whether or not a mushroom is Boletus edulis. And this species dries very well. So if you are lucky and you find more than you can eat right away, you can absolutely dry them and use them later. All right. Now, here are two species of mushrooms I pretty much only find in White Mountains. And that is the blueing bolete over here, and this is the bay bolete to the right. We did see this one today. We didn't see this one, but this one will be coming out soon. And this one, the color is the same color as straw. And when you touch it or rub it or break into it, it instantly turns a deep, dark indigo blue color. And it's very alarming unless you know that that's what it's supposed to do, and that's some comfort that tells you it's in fact what it is, called the bluing bolete, Droperis cyanescens, which means turns blue. Now, some of the advice that you hear from mushroom instructors will say, never eat a bolete that bruises blue, because there are some that will make you sick that do that. And so if you just avoid all mushrooms that bruise blue, you avoid most of the boletes that will make you sick, but you also avoid this yummy one. So I would put this one in the intermediate category. You know, if you're just a novice, probably should be gathering this one, but if you have reached that point where you're starting to build up some experience and confidence, yeah, this is a fun one to look for in White Mountains. And then this bay bolete, this one also bruises blue too, just on the pores right there, so you can write messages to your friends on the surface of the pores there. So And yeah, so here's an example of the blueing bolete and chanterelles cooked up together. So you see there's that edible Droperus cyanescens mixed in with the chanterelles. All right. Now this mushroom I haven't seen in northern New England, but it could grow here. You have oak trees, and I see this growing in oak, so it could be here. It's called a beefsteak mushroom. It has no poisonous lookalikes. It looks like a piece of meat hanging on a tree. And it's got marbling just like a piece of meat. When you squeeze it, red juice comes out like a piece of meat. So my favorite way so far to use it is to just brush it with some teriyaki sauce and grill it on a hibachi like a piece of meat. All right, and here's the cauliflower mushroom. So I have seen this in New Hampshire, but once again, probably more likely southern New England. And this mushroom looks like a mass of yellow egg noodles at the base of a pine tree, usually around Labor Day. So there's another view of it right there. And it has no poisonous lookalikes. It's really one of my favorite mushrooms. This one definitely grows in New Hampshire on beech trees, and it's called a bear's head tooth. And it's often right at eye level, so there it is right there. And the texture of this one has no poisonous lookalikes. And the texture of this mushroom is really similar to crabby. So it's very good that way. Cooked any way you use crabby. Now here's probably the most bizarre organism in the show. This is corn smut. And this is a fungus that gets into the developing ears of corn, and it swells up the little kernels, and it does that to them. And I'll have to admit, this is not the most appetizing thing I ever thought about putting in my mouth. So, but you can see in this previous, I'm very excited that I found this, because I had heard that in Mexico, this is considered a delicacy. In fact, during the days of the Aztecs, that if you were a peasant and you found this growing on your farm, you weren't even allowed to touch it. You'd have to send for an emissary of the emperor, and only they were allowed to collect it and take it off to the royal courts, and only the royalty could eat it. I thought, all right, it must be good then. So I cooked it, I brought the specimen home, and I cooked it like you would cook a standard store-bought mushroom, just, sauteed it, a little butter, a little onion. And I took one bite, and it tasted like mud. And I thought, what is the big deal about this thing? So then I tried it one more time, and I cooked it in a Mexican style with some hot peppers, some poblano chiles, and there's some kind of chemical transformation that happens when you do that, and that made the corn smut taste good. So if you're going to cook it that way, that's what I would suggest. All right, here's Hen of the Woods mushrooms. This one also grows in oak trees. You have oak trees up here, so ostensibly you ought to be able to find this one. And those are big, but they can get bigger than that. And so you can find a lot of them. And I actually prefer this species when it's smaller, when it's immature, what I would call the chick stage, because then it's much more tender and wild at that stage. All right, and then there's oyster mushrooms, which you typically up here find on maple, occasionally a poplar tree, in the spring or sometimes in the fall. Sometimes even around 4th of July you can find them. The fall mushrooms tend to have less of the black beetles in them. The black beetles are just an annoyance. They don't really make it inedible or anything, but if you find these mushrooms during the hot weather, just shake the gills rather thoroughly to see all the little black beetles drop out. And anyway, these are not at the safe end of the line, but not at the dangerous end either. It's something that you can learn if you're intermediate mushroom. All right, so I hope you can find some of those. All right, now this one, anybody know what this plant is? All right. This is sort of a trick question, because even when I show this plant on Cape Cod, where everybody should know what it is, people don't get it. That's what a cranberry looks like when it's blooming. A cranberry used to be called a craneberry because the flowers look like little cranes. Right? So the bird. So anyway, that's what a cranberry looks like. And you do have cranberries up here. You have the bog cranberries that grow up here. And if I showed you that photo, you would have gotten what it was. Anyway. So, I would be misleading you if I said you haven't lived to try the flavor of a wild cranberry, because it's basically the same as a cultivated cranberry. Maybe a little sweeter if you let the fruit stay on the little vines longer than the commercial people do, and it might be hit by a frost or two. Then you might notice a difference. But this is a northern New England plant. This is the mountain cranberry, which happens to be the same thing as the lingonberry. You know how the Scandinavians are, like to lord it over, so we have lingonberries. Well, we do too. It's the same exact species that they have. We have too. So, Mount Cardigan, not far from here, has a bunch of these on top. And and the flavor is very similar to a regular bog cranberry. You could use that pretty much synonymously. All right. Then there's this plant called the high bush cranberry, which is actually variety viburnum, and it has a similar flavor to a cultivated cranberry. And then there's this one, viburnum eduo, called the squashberry, which is a really fun plant to find, and you're really lucky because it's only here in the White Mountains and further north from here. So you only find it in the northern half of northern New England. So we don't have this in southern New England. And it's like a high bush cranberry, only even a little better. And you can see with the snow in the background, these berries persist on the bushes into the winter. So, you know, I was up on a cross-country skiing trip in New Hampshire in February when I took this photo, and we made a delightful cranberry sauce from these fruit. Okay, so here are hazelnuts, and there are two varieties of native hazelnuts that grow in New England. The only difference is the appearance of the husk surrounding the nut. So here is the common hazelnut, and there's the little hazelnuts peeking out from the husk when the husks are ripe. And the kind you might see a little bit more frequently up here is the beaked hazelnut. So we saw these today on the trail. So there's the strange thing sticking out like a bird's beak. So the nut is developing in there. And same deal with the hazelnuts. I would be lying if I said that wild hazelnuts are better than commercial hazelnuts, because they're not. They're the same flavor, and these wild ones are smaller than the commercial hazelnuts. So you might say to yourself, I'm going to go to the store and buy hazelnuts, which is, once again, is fine, but I have collected thousands of hazelnuts from the wild here in New England, so it is possible. Just look for them in the sun. That's where they're going to bear more heavily. So here's a native species called groundnut. This is here at D Acres, growing right by the entrance here. It's a native plant. The main edible part of this plant is the tuber, so these guys right here. And so far, my favorite way to cook them is to just slice them and fry them in a little vegetable oil until they turn golden and make groundnut chips that way. All right. And here's Jerusalem artichoke. This plant grows in northern New England, but it's not native to northern New England. It's actually native to the Midwest. How to get to New England? Our eastern Indian tribes traded for it. And so we got the tubers. And so places where Jerusalem artichoke occurs in the wild may be places that descended from patches that were originally established by Native Americans hundreds of years ago. Okay, and there's the tubers, the edible part of the Jerusalem artichoke. All right, so here's a plant called autumn olive, and we're pretty much at the northern range for this plant now. But if you go down into the Pemi Valley, and so, for example, or the Merrimack River Valley, so, for example, if you take, what is the route that goes east of 93 toward Meredith? Is it Route 104? Well, anyway, this plant grows along that road. So we'll grow at least that far north. So that's practically the White Mountains. Anyway, so that's what it looks like when it blooms. And there's a close-up of the flowers. They have a very sweet, pleasant smell. It's an invasive species, so this is another guilt-free foraging opportunity. So there's the ripe fruit. So I pick that, I puree it, I dehydrate it, and I make a fruit leather from it. Here's a close-up of what the fruit looks like. It's pea-sized with silvery white speckles on the outside. You can eat it raw right off the plant. This is typically what I do it. And then you could also make wine from it. Okay, so finally, here is the last slide of the show. And this photo documents a really successful foraging day I had about 10 years ago in central Massachusetts. So some of the stuff in this photo are things that you're not going to find in the White Mountains. But anyway, you get the idea of what you could achieve with just your local species here. You could have a day like this. Hopefully you will. All right, so in this photo, we've got wild plums over here, shagbark hickory nuts, which I didn't get a chance to talk about today. All these are porcini mushrooms. There's a big basket of autumn olives. There's a wild mushroom species called the Agaricus arvensis, or the horse mushroom, which is like a wild counterpart of your standard store-bought mushroom. That's quite good. You're probably wondering what the barbecue grill is doing in the photo. Well, somebody had put one of those out with their trash, and I needed one of those at home, so I just foraged for that. Instead of foraging for everything else. So thank you very much. That was the show. So, all right, so there is a typo on this slide. And the typo is this, my work number. I don't work anymore. I'm retired. So ignore that number, but you can reach me these other things. And there's a copy of my book that I mentioned. So the book was written for a land trust that's in the northeast corner of Massachusetts. So stuff that grows there that you won't find here, for example, the beach plums, the beach peas, they're not here in the White Mountains. But, you know, the cattails that I talked about, yes, you have them here. That's right. But in the wild, you're not going to encounter them. But elderberry I talked about, the autumn olive I talked about, the cattails I talked about, the black locust I talked about, the black raspberries I talked about, the Japanese knotweed I talked about, and there's a lot of other stuff in the book that you would find relevant. So I did bring some books with me today. If you want to get one, they cost $15. And I don't keep any of the money. I give it all to this group down here, the Essex County Greenbelt Association, the Land Trust, that covers Northeast Mass because, as I mentioned earlier, they allow foraging as a permitted activity on all their properties that are open to the public. And I'm so grateful for that. I just give them all the money and they told me to buy more. Right. Are there any questions?
I have a question.
Yes.
The hazelnut?
Yes.
With the little green bud?
You mean the beaked thing? The thing that looks like a bird's beak sticking out?
Yes.
Yes.
When do I harvest that?
That's a really good question. So while I answer that question, I'm just going to come back here and grab the handouts that I promised you. So let me do that so people can get those. And
Do you want me to hand them out?
yeah, sure. So here we go. Yeah, anybody that didn't get one. And I promise you something to eat, so let me do that. All right, so the shagbark hickory, which we didn't talk about today because I tend not to find them this far north, it is my #1 favorite edible species, and so I made some cookies for you from the shagbark hickory. So this recipe's on my webpage, and several years ago, the Appalachian Mountain Club Outdoors magazine did a profile of me, and this was the featured recipe, was these hickory wafer cookies. So please take one and pass them around. Okay. All right, so here's the answer to that question that's longer than we were expecting. All right, so hazelnuts, when they are ripe, either the little nut will drop out of the husk or the whole husk will fall on the ground. Do not wait until that happens because you will never get any. The squirrels and chipmunks will get all of them. All right? So what you need to do is pick the nut when it's still attached to the hazelnut bush. And you want to, like I showed in that slide, let me just go back to that slide. If I can. It's going to take me backwards. Just, I'll keep doing this till I get there. Just shout out when I'm there. I can keep talking to you so I don't have to look at the screen. All right. So anyway, the beaked hazelnut will begin to turn brown.
Yeah.
All right, great. Oh, one more. There we go. Okay. See how it's beginning to turn brown, but it's still attached to the plant? That's the time to gather. Right? In Massachusetts, I have a date marked on my calendar when I go out and gather hazelnuts, and that date is September 8th. And so, that, not knowing any better, that's the date I would check up here too. And it should be around that time when the nuts are ripe. And so, so they are slightly underripe at that stage. So what I will do is just spread out some newspaper on the floor of my garage and just spread out the hazelnuts, still in their husks, on that newspaper and ignore them for a couple weeks. And that husk will turn brown, and then the nut will separate from the husk easily. And then that's the nut, that's a little, the thing that looks like this. These guys down here. That's what the nut looks like inside the husk, and you crack those open to get the hazelnut. All right. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Do you have some of these recipes in your book?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Most of the chapters where I'm featuring a plant like cattails or stinging nettle or Jewelweed or they have recipes associated with it. Yes.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Russ.